Blake Morrison stepped out of his black F-150 Raptor, the October evening air crisp against his weathered face. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had stared death in the face and walked away unscathed. His neighbors in the affluent Westbrook subdivision knew him as a successful security consultant, but few knew the full truth about his 12 years as a Navy SEAL, or why his former teammates still called him the Phantom. The two-story colonial house before him represented everything he'd fought for overseas, the American dream in brick and mortar. He'd purchased it 3 years ago when he married Candace, using the savings from his private security contracts with Fortune 500 companies. The manicured lawn, the white picket fence, the luxury cars in the driveway. It all looked perfect from the outside. Blake's phone buzzed as he walked toward the front door. Tyler, his younger brother, was texting about their weekend fishing trip. Tyler had always been the gentle one, choosing teaching over the military path Blake had taken. At 28, Tyler worked at Jefferson Elementary and lived a simple life in his modest apartment downtown. Their parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving the brothers closer than ever. "Honey, I'm home," Blake called out as he entered the house, noting Candace's silver BMW still in the garage. She should be preparing dinner. They had reservations at Romano's tonight for their 3rd wedding anniversary. Candace appeared from the kitchen, her blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup immaculate despite being home all day. At 31, she had the kind of beauty that turned heads, which was exactly what had attracted Blake at the corporate charity gala where they'd met. She'd been working as an event coordinator then, though she'd stopped working after their marriage, claiming she wanted to focus on starting a family. "How was your day?" she asked, giving him a quick kiss that felt more obligatory than passionate. "Wrapped up the Henderson Industries contract. Their executive protection detail is fully trained now," Blake replied, studying her face, noting the slight tension around her eyes that had become more frequent lately. "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" "Just tired. I've been planning the neighborhood barbecue for next month." She turned away quickly. "Derek Walsh stopped by earlier. He's offering to help with the setup." Derek Walsh, their neighbor from 3 houses down, was a divorce attorney who'd moved in 6 months ago. Blake had met him at a few neighborhood gatherings, charming, successful, and divorced. Something about the man had always rubbed Blake the wrong way, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "That's nice of him," Blake said carefully. "What kind of help?" "Oh, tables, chairs, coordination. He knows a lot of vendors." Candace's voice had that artificial lightness that Blake's training had taught him to recognize as deception. As they prepared for dinner, Blake watched his wife move around their bedroom. 3 years of marriage, and lately, it felt like living with a stranger. The passionate woman who used to greet him with enthusiasm had been replaced by someone going through the motions. Their conversations had become surface level, their intimacy sporadic. At Romano's, Candace spent most of dinner on her phone, claiming work calls for the barbecue planning. Blake observed her micro-expressions, the slight smile when texting, the way she angled the phone away from him, the quickened breathing when certain messages arrived. "Candace," he said finally, setting down his wine glass. "Are we okay?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide with what looked like panic before she composed herself. "Of course we are. Why would you ask that? You seem distant lately, distracted." "I'm just stressed about the barbecue. It's a big responsibility." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I love you, Blake. Happy anniversary." But her hand was cold, her smile forced, and Blake's instincts, honed by years of combat and covert operations, screamed that something was very wrong. Blake's phone shattered the 2 a.m. silence with its piercing ring. He bolted upright instantly, his combat reflexes overriding sleep. Beside him, Candace stirred but didn't wake. She'd taken an Ambien, claiming stress-induced insomnia. "Blake." Tyler's voice came through strained and thick, barely recognizable. "Tyler, what's wrong? I'm in the ER at Mercy General. They broke my jaw. Blake, I need you." Blake was out of bed and pulling on clothes before Tyler finished speaking. "I'm on my way. What happened? I'll explain when you get here. It's about Candace." The line went dead. Blake grabbed his keys, scribbled a note for Candace about a family emergency, and raced through the empty streets. His mind cycled through possibilities, each worse than the last. Tyler wasn't the type to get into fights. He was a pacifist who hadn't thrown a punch since elementary school. Mercy General's ER was a fluorescent-lit hell of antiseptic smells and muffled suffering. Blake found Tyler in room 7, his face a patchwork of bruises and medical tape. His jaw was wired shut, his left eye swollen, completely closed. "Jesus Christ," Blake whispered, pulling up a chair. "Who did this to you?" Tyler struggled to speak through his wired jaw. The words slurred but were urgent. "I went to your house tonight. Wanted to surprise you with those fishing lures I found. Your anniversary gift." Blake leaned closer. "Take your time. I used my spare key. Thought you were asleep. Heard voices in your study." Tyler's good eye fixed on Blake with desperate intensity. Candace was there with Derek Walsh. They weren't alone. Blake's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean, not alone?" "2 other guys. Big guys. Military-looking." Tyler struggled to continue. "I hid behind the bookshelf. They were talking about an accident plan for you, Blake." Candace was crying, saying she couldn't go through with it anymore, but Derek kept pushing her. The room seemed to tilt. Blake gripped the bed rail, his knuckles white. "An accident plan?" Derek said they'd already arranged everything. "Make it look like a training accident during one of your security demonstrations. The insurance money, the house, they'd split it all." Tyler's voice cracked. "I tried to record it on my phone, but they saw me. Derek's guys, they beat me unconscious. They left me in the alley behind Murphy's bar." Blake stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His reflection stared back, a man who'd survived insurgent attacks, hostage rescues, and classified operations that would never see the light of day. But he'd never imagined the enemy would be sleeping in his bed. "There's more," Tyler whispered. "Before they knocked me out, I heard Derek talking about a timeline. Something about your hunting trip next weekend. Blake, they're planning to kill you." The hunting trip. Blake's annual solo expedition to his cabin in the Colorado mountains. 3 days of isolation, where an accident could easily be staged. He'd mentioned it to Candace weeks ago, and she'd encouraged him to go, saying he needed the relaxation. Blake returned to Tyler's bedside, his expression hardening into something his former teammates would recognize. The cold, calculating mask of the Phantom. "Did you get any of it recorded?" Tyler nodded. "Phone's in my jacket. Battery died before they found me, but I got about 2 minutes." Blake retrieved the phone and scrolled to the voice memo. Despite the poor audio quality, he could clearly hear Candace's voice saying, "I don't know if I can watch him die, Derek. What if something goes wrong?" And Derek's response, "It'll look clean. My contacts know what they're doing. By Sunday night, you'll be a grieving widow with a very comfortable future." The recording continued with more details. The insurance policy Blake had increased to $2 million at Candace's suggestion, the fake suicide note they'd prepared in case the accident plan failed, and most damning of all, Derek's casual mention of his previous 2 wives' unfortunate accidents. Blake saved the recording to multiple backups, his mind already shifting into operational mode. 12 years of special operations had taught him that successful missions required patience, planning, and precise execution. His enemies had revealed their hand too early, giving him the advantage. "Tyler, I need you to listen carefully," Blake said, his voice dropping to the deadly quiet tone his former squad had learned to fear. "Tomorrow, you're going to tell the police you were mugged by random strangers. You never saw their faces clearly. You don't mention Candace or Derek. But Blake, they think you're neutralized as a threat. Let them keep thinking that while I handle this." Blake's eyes had taken on a cold gleam. "They forgot something important about me, little brother. In Iraq, they called me the Phantom because my enemies never saw me coming until it was too late." Tyler grabbed Blake's arm with his uninjured hand. "What are you going to do?" Blake smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "I'm going to give them exactly what they planned for me. But first, I'm going home to play the loving husband while I plan their destruction." As Blake left the hospital, his phone buzzed with a text from Candace. "Hope Tyler's okay. I'll wait up for you. Love you." The irony wasn't lost on him. She was probably practicing her grieving widow routine while texting her lover about their success. But Blake Morrison wasn't some civilian who'd break down and beg for his marriage. He was a weapon forged in the crucible of warfare, and he was about to remind everyone why they'd called him the Phantom. The war was coming home, and Blake intended to win it completely. Blake slipped back into his house at 4:30 a.m., moving with the ghost-like silence that had made him legendary among special forces. Candace lay in their bed, breathing the deep, regular rhythm of Ambien-induced sleep. She'd positioned herself diagonally across the mattress, unconsciously claiming territory that was no longer his. He studied her face in the moonlight filtering through their bedroom windows. 3 years of marriage, and he'd never truly known the woman beside him. The tears she'd shed on their wedding day, the passionate nights early in their relationship, the way she'd comforted him after nightmares about his tours overseas. Had any of it been real? Blake changed clothes silently and slipped into his study, the same room where Tyler had overheard the conspiracy against his life. He activated his computer and began what he did best: intelligence gathering. Derek Walsh's background check revealed disturbing patterns. Born Derek Walsh Patterson in Tampa, he'd changed his name after his first wife's accidental drowning during their Bahamas honeymoon 7 years ago. His second wife had died in a hiking accident in Utah 3 years later, leaving Derek as the sole beneficiary of her substantial inheritance from her family's pharmaceutical fortune. The man was a predator who'd perfected the art of murdering wealthy women while maintaining plausible deniability. Blake cross-referenced the dates and locations, discovering that Derek had lived in 5 different states over the past decade, always leaving after a significant financial windfall. But Derek had made one crucial error. He'd chosen the wrong target this time. Blake pulled up his secure contact database. 12 years of special operations had connected him with soldiers, intelligence officers, and contractors who operated in the gray areas between legal and necessary. These were men and women who understood that some problems required unconventional solutions. First call, Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, his former squadmate, who now ran a private security firm in Denver. Tank specialized in discrete problem-solving for clients who preferred to handle issues outside the court system. Blake, Jesus, it's 5 a.m. This better be life or death. It is. I need a favor, Tank. A big one. Blake outlined the situation without revealing specific names or locations. Tank listened with the professional silence of a man who'd heard worse stories and done darker deeds. "How clean you need this?" Tank asked when Blake finished. "Clean enough that they disappear completely, but not so clean that they don't suffer first. I want them to know exactly why this is happening to them. That's going to cost extra. Money is not an issue." Second call. Rebecca. ICE. Santos, former military intelligence analyst who now operated a private investigation firm specializing in corporate espionage and digital surveillance. If Derek had additional conspirators or hidden assets, ICE would find them. "Blake Morrison," she said, answering on the first ring despite the early hour. "Haven't heard from you since the Blackwater contract in Syria. What kind of ghost are you hunting now?" Blake sent her Derek's information and a summary of the situation. Within an hour, ICE had penetrated Derek's digital life, uncovering encrypted communications with a network of contractors who specialized in accidental deaths. The evidence was staggering. Derek wasn't just a serial killer. He was running a sophisticated operation targeting wealthy women across multiple states. "Blake, this guy's got a body count of at least 8 women over the past 15 years, ICE reported. He's got a team of 3 regulars who handle the wet work, plus local contractors, depending on the location. Your wife isn't his first target in your area. He tested his operation on a widow named Patricia Hoffman 6 months ago." Blake remembered Patricia. She'd been found dead at the bottom of her stairs, an apparent accident. She'd been wealthy, recently widowed, and living alone. The perfect test run for Derek's plan. "There's more," ICE continued. "Your wife's not just a victim in this. She's an active participant. Her phone records show she's been in contact with Derek for 8 months, since before he moved to your neighborhood. She specifically sought him out through a dating app, even while married to you." Blake absorbed this information with cold fury. Candace hadn't been seduced or manipulated. She'd been a willing conspirator from the beginning. Third call. Doctor. Elizabeth Hayes, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating Special Forces veterans and occasionally consulted on psychological warfare tactics. Blake needed to understand Derek's mindset to exploit his weaknesses. "The profile you're describing suggests a narcissistic psychopath with severe impulse control regarding financial gain," Dr. Hayes explained after Blake presented a hypothetical case study. "These individuals typically have elaborate backup plans, but also specific psychological triggers. They can't resist demonstrating their superiority, especially when they believe they're in control." "What kind of triggers?" Blake asked. "Humiliation, loss of control, having their intelligence questioned. They also tend to keep trophies, evidence of their successful manipulations. If you want to draw this person out, make them feel intellectually superior while secretly documenting their confessions." By noon, Blake had developed a comprehensive battle plan. Phase 1 would involve allowing Derek and Candace to believe their original plan was proceeding smoothly while Blake gathered additional evidence. Phase 2 would spring the trap, using Derek's psychological weaknesses against him. Phase 3 would be the execution of justice, permanent and untraceable. Candace woke at 11 a.m., stumbling downstairs in her silk robe with practiced vulnerability. "How's Tyler? You were gone so long." "He was mugged downtown. Broken jaw, but he'll recover." Blake watched her face carefully. She displayed perfect concern, slightly widened eyes, pursed lips, a gentle hand on his arm. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible. What did the police say?" "They're investigating, but Tyler couldn't identify his attackers. Random crime, probably." Relief flickered across her features before she composed herself. Should we visit him today? Tomorrow? He's sedated now, and the doctors want him to rest. Blake pulled her into an embrace, feeling her body tense slightly before she relaxed into the performance. I was thinking about our anniversary dinner last night. Maybe we should plan something special for this weekend. This weekend? Her voice pitched slightly higher. I was going to go hunting, but I'd rather spend time with you. We could drive to that bed and breakfast in Asheville you mentioned. Panic flashed in her eyes before she controlled it. Actually, I think you should go hunting. You've been so stressed with work lately. The mountains would do you good. Are you sure? I don't want to leave you alone. I'll be fine. Derek offered to check on me if you were gone. Such a sweet neighbor. Blake smiled and kissed her forehead. You're right. The mountains will be perfect. As Candace went upstairs to shower, Blake activated the hidden recording equipment he'd installed throughout the house during his errands that morning. Every conversation, every phone call, every whispered consultation with Derek would be documented. The game had begun, and Blake Morrison was playing to win. Blake spent the next 2 days playing the role of the unsuspecting husband while constructing an elaborate surveillance network around Derek and Candace. His military training had taught him that successful operations required overwhelming intelligence advantages, and he intended to know every detail of their plan before making his move. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected opportunity. Derek Walsh knocked on Blake's front door at 7 a.m., carrying a coffee and wearing the concerned expression of a good neighbor. Blake, I heard about Tyler from Candace. Terrible thing. I wanted to offer my help if you need anything. Blake invited him in, studying Derek's body language. The man was confident, almost cocky, with the easy charm of a practiced predator. At 42, Derek maintained himself well. Expensive clothes, perfect teeth, manicured nails. He looked like success, which made him appealing to women like Candace, who valued appearances. I appreciate that, Derek. Tyler's going to be fine, but it's been stressful. I can imagine. Random violence is terrifying. Derek's eyes scanned the room, lingering on family photos and expensive electronics. A predator cataloging assets. Candace mentioned you're planning a hunting trip this weekend. Probably good timing for some stress relief. Yeah, my annual solo trip to Colorado. 3 days of peace and quiet. Blake watched Derek's micro-expressions carefully. The man's pupils dilated slightly and his breathing quickened. Classic signs of excitement. Sounds perfect. I'm actually a hunter myself, though I prefer more social situations. Derek smiled. Maybe next time we could arrange a group trip. Blake doubted Derek would be alive for a next time, but he nodded agreeably. I'd like that. Where do you usually hunt? Derek launched into detailed stories about hunting expeditions, and Blake realized the man was genuinely knowledgeable about weapons, terrain, and hunting accidents. He wasn't just planning murder. He was planning the perfect hunting accident, complete with realistic details that would satisfy investigators. After Derek left, Blake activated his secure communication system and contacted Tank Rodriguez with an update. I need accelerated deployment, Blake said. They're moving faster than anticipated. Copy that. My team's already in position outside Denver. We can be at your location in 12 hours if needed. Negative. I want them to spring their trap first. Let them think they've succeeded before we reveal the truth. Blake's second call was to Rebecca Santos, who had been monitoring Derek's digital communications around the clock. Blake, you need to hear this, she said immediately. Derek made 3 calls last night after visiting you. First, to a contact in Colorado. They're planning to sabotage your hunting cabin's propane system. Make it look like a gas leak explosion. Who's the contact? Guy named Vincent Torres, former Army demolitions expert with a dishonorable discharge. He's been working freelance for Derek's operation for 2 years, already killed 4 people in apparent accidents. Blake felt the familiar calm that descended before combat operations. What else? Second call was to your wife. They're planning to establish her alibi by having her attend a neighborhood book club meeting Friday night, then a charity brunch Saturday morning. She'll be highly visible with multiple witnesses when your accident occurs. And the third call, this one's interesting. Derek called someone named Amanda Cross in Phoenix. Apparently she's his next target after Candace, another wealthy widow he's been grooming online. He told her about his successful operation in progress and how she'd be next in line for his services. Blake memorized Amanda Cross's information. If Derek had a pattern of future victims, Blake would ensure they were warned after he finished his current mission. That afternoon, Blake visited Tyler in the hospital. His brother's condition had improved slightly. The swelling had reduced enough that one eye could open partially. "How are you holding up?" Tyler asked through his wired jaw. "Better than them," Blake replied grimly. "I need you to know something, Tyler. After this weekend, Candace and Derek won't be a problem anymore." Tyler studied his brother's face with growing concern. "Blake, whatever you're planning—" "They made 2 fatal mistakes," Blake interrupted. "First, they underestimated who they were targeting. Second, they hurt my family. I've killed enemies for less than that. Don't throw your life away for revenge." Blake leaned closer to his brother. "This isn't revenge, Tyler. This is justice. And when I'm finished, there won't be any evidence linking me to what happens to them." Thursday evening, Blake sat in his study while Candace prepared dinner. Both of them maintained the charade of domestic normalcy. His hidden cameras had recorded 3 phone conversations between Candace and Derek throughout the day, each one more damning than the last. In the first call, Candace had expressed last-minute doubts. What if something goes wrong? What if they trace it back to us? Derek's response had been coldly reassuring. "Vincent's done this dozens of times. Your husband will be vaporized along with half the cabin. They'll find fragments at best." The second call revealed their post-murder plans. "We'll wait 6 months before going public with our relationship. Grieving widow finding love again. It's a beautiful story. The insurance money will be cleared by then." The third call had been the most revealing. Derek had grown impatient with Candace's nervousness and revealed more than he'd intended. "Listen to me carefully. I've done this 8 times before, and I've never been caught. Your husband is just another target. Stop thinking of him as your husband and start thinking of him as our payday." Blake saved all the recordings to multiple secure servers, ensuring that even if something happened to him, the evidence would survive. But he had no intention of dying in Colorado. Derek and Vincent Torres would discover that hunting the phantom required skills they didn't possess. Friday morning arrived with October snow dusting the windows. Blake loaded his truck with hunting gear, camping equipment, and weapons, but also with military-grade surveillance equipment, explosive countermeasures, and communication devices that would allow him to coordinate with Tank's team in real time. Candace kissed him goodbye at the front door. Her performance was flawless. "Be safe out there. Come back to me." "I will," Blake promised, meaning it in ways she couldn't understand. As he drove toward Colorado, Blake's secure phone buzzed with a final update from Rebecca Santos. "Vincent Torres arrived at your cabin location yesterday. Derek's flying to Denver this morning to be close enough to confirm the kill personally. They want to be certain you're dead before they celebrate." Blake smiled grimly as he turned onto the mountain highway. Derek wanted to be close enough to confirm the kill. Perfect. Blake would make sure Derek got a front row seat to the real show. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Blake Morrison was very good at his job. Blake's cabin sat in a remote valley 30 miles outside Aspen, accessible only by a winding mountain road that he had deliberately chosen for its isolation. He'd purchased the property 5 years ago as a retreat from the civilized world, never imagining it would become the stage for his deadliest operation. As his truck climbed the final switchbacks, Blake activated his counter-surveillance equipment. The readings confirmed what Rebecca Santos had warned him about. Vincent Torres had been busy. Heat signatures indicated improvised explosive devices rigged to the cabin's propane system, motion sensors positioned along the approach routes, and at least 3 separate trigger mechanisms that would turn his peaceful retreat into a crematorium. Blake parked his truck a quarter-mile from the cabin and began his approach on foot, moving with the practiced stealth that had made him legendary in Iraqi urban warfare. The October snow provided excellent cover, muffling his footsteps while revealing the tracks of his would-be assassin. Vincent Torres had made his first mistake by underestimating his target. The man had positioned himself in a hunting blind 200 yards from the cabin, expecting to observe Blake's death from a safe distance. He'd set up professional-grade equipment, night vision scopes, long-range communication gear, and a sniper rifle as backup in case the explosives failed. What Vincent didn't know was that Blake had been tracking him for the past hour, using thermal imaging equipment that the military hadn't declassified yet. Tank Rodriguez had provided cutting-edge surveillance gear that made Vincent's setup look primitive by comparison. Blake circled behind Vincent's position, approaching from the blind spot that every sniper created when focusing on a target. At 4:30 p.m., with twilight beginning to settle over the mountains, Blake made his move. Vincent Torres never heard him coming. One moment, he was peering through his scope, waiting for Blake to enter the cabin and trigger the explosives. The next moment, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth while the muzzle of a suppressed pistol pressed against the base of his skull. "Vincent Torres," Blake whispered, his voice carrying the deadly calm that had terrified insurgents from Fallujah to Kandahar. Former Army demolitions, dishonorable discharge for theft and insubordination. Currently employed by Derek Walsh in the murder-for-hire business. Vincent tried to struggle, but Blake's grip was unbreakable. 12 years of hand-to-hand combat training, enhanced by rage over his brother's beating, made resistance futile. "Here's what's going to happen," Blake continued. "You're going to call Derek Walsh and confirm that I entered the cabin. Tell him the explosives detonated perfectly and that I'm dead. Then you're going to answer some questions about your operation." Blake eased the pressure on Vincent's mouth slightly. "If you try to warn Derek or signal for help, I'll put a bullet in your spine and leave you paralyzed in these mountains. The bears will find you before any rescue team does. Understand?" Vincent nodded frantically. Blake handed him a secure phone with Derek's number already dialed. "Remember, I can kill you in a dozen different ways without making a sound. Don't test me." Vincent made the call with Blake's gun pressed against his temple. His voice shook slightly, but he delivered the message. Package delivered. Target eliminated. The explosion was perfect. Nothing left to identify. Derek's voice crackled through the speaker, excited and triumphant. "Excellent work, Vincent. Any witnesses?" "Negative. Completely isolated. I'm cleaning up the site now and will exfiltrate as planned." "Perfect. Send me the photos for confirmation, then get out of there. I'll wire your payment tonight." Blake ended the call and smiled coldly. Derek thought he was celebrating his success, but he'd actually just signed his own death warrant. "Now," Blake said, forcing Vincent to his knees, "let's discuss your employment history with Derek Walsh." What followed was a 30-minute interrogation that revealed the full scope of Derek's operation. Vincent had participated in 12 murders over the past 3 years, each one disguised as an accident. Derek recruited veterans with criminal records, offering them substantial payments for jobs that traditional hitmen wouldn't touch. "He's got a whole network," Vincent gasped, blood running from his nose where Blake had encouraged his cooperation. "Ex-military, former law enforcement, guys who can't get legitimate work. He calls us his cleanup crew." "How many active operators?" 6 regulars, maybe a dozen freelancers, depending on the job. Derek's got contracts lined up for the next 2 years. Rich widows, inheritance disputes, insurance fraud, guys making millions. Blake recorded everything on his secure device, building a comprehensive case file that would ensure Derek's entire network was exposed. But first, he had personal business to finish. "You beat my brother," Blake said quietly. "Put him in the hospital with a broken jaw." Vincent's eyes widened in terror as he realized who he was facing. "That was orders, man. Clean up loose ends." "I was just following." Blake's fist connected with Vincent's solar plexus, dropping him to the ground, gasping for air. "My brother is a school teacher. He's never hurt anyone in his life." Blake zip-tied Vincent's hands and feet, then secured him to a tree 20 yards from his hunting blind. The man would survive the night if the cold didn't get him, but he wouldn't be calling for help anytime soon. "Stay quiet, and you might live until the authorities find you. Make noise, and the bears will find you first." Blake returned to Vincent's position and began setting up the next phase of his operation. Using Vincent's own equipment, he staged a series of photographs showing a massive explosion at his cabin location. The images were convincing enough to satisfy Derek's need for confirmation while leaving Blake officially dead. As night fell over the Colorado mountains, Blake activated his satellite communication system and contacted Tank Rodriguez. "Phase 1 complete," Blake reported. "Target believes the primary is eliminated. Ready for Phase 2 deployment." "Copy that," Tank responded. "My team's in position outside Denver. Derek Walsh just checked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown, probably planning to celebrate. You want us to move on him now?" "Negative. Let him enjoy his victory for one more night. Tomorrow we spring the real trap." Blake settled into Vincent's abandoned hunting blind. His scope was trained on the distant lights of Denver. Somewhere in that city, Derek Walsh was probably toasting his successful murder while planning his next move with Candace. They thought they'd eliminated the only threat to their plan. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between killing a man and hunting the phantom. Derek Walsh woke Saturday morning in his Denver hotel suite, feeling like a king. The previous evening's celebration had been perfect. Expensive champagne, a view of the Rocky Mountains, and the satisfaction of another successful operation. By his calculations, Candace's inheritance would be processed within 6 months, giving them access to over $3 million between Blake's life insurance and their joint assets. His secure phone buzzed with a text from Candace. "Media reports about an explosion in the mountains. Haven't heard from Blake. Should I call the police?" Derek smiled as he typed his response. "Wait until Sunday evening. Don't seem too eager. Remember, you're a worried wife waiting for her husband to return." Derek's phone rang immediately. Vincent Torres was calling with an update. "Change of plans." Vincent's voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "We need to meet. There's been a complication." Derek's confidence wavered slightly. "What kind of complication?" "You confirmed the target was eliminated." "I can't discuss it over the phone. Meet me at the warehouse at noon. Come alone." The line went dead, leaving Derek staring at his phone with growing unease. Vincent had never sounded like that before. Desperate, almost frightened. But Derek pushed down his concerns. The operation had been flawless. Whatever Vincent was worried about could be handled. Derek drove to the warehouse district outside Denver, where he maintained a storage facility for his operations. The building was perfect for sensitive meetings, isolated, soundproof, and registered under one of his false identities. He arrived at 11:45 a.m. to find Vincent's truck already in the parking lot. But something felt wrong immediately. The warehouse loading dock was open, which Vincent never would have done without explicit instructions. Derek drew his concealed pistol and approached cautiously. Inside the warehouse, he found Vincent Torres secured to a metal chair with zip ties, his face bruised and bloodied. But Vincent was conscious and staring directly at Derek with an expression of absolute terror. "Hello, Derek." The voice came from behind him, calm and controlled. Derek spun around to find Blake Morrison standing in the shadows near the warehouse entrance, very much alive and pointing a military-grade assault rifle directly at Derek's chest. "Impossible," Derek whispered, his mind reeling. "Vincent confirmed the kill. I saw the explosion photos." Blake stepped into the light, and Derek saw something in his eyes that made his blood freeze. This wasn't the suburban security consultant Derek had been planning to murder. This was a predator, a killer who moved with the fluid grace of someone who had ended lives professionally. "Vincent's been very helpful," Blake said conversationally. "He told me all about your operation. 12 murders in 3 years, each one disguised as an accident. Your network of ex-military contractors, your plans for Candace and me." Derek raised his pistol, but Blake was faster. A single shot from Blake's rifle sent Derek's gun spinning across the warehouse floor, along with 2 of Derek's fingers. Derek collapsed, screaming, clutching his mangled hand against his chest. Blood poured between his fingers as he stared up at Blake in shock and agony. "That's for my brother's broken jaw," Blake said coldly. "Tyler's a schoolteacher, Derek. He's never hurt anyone in his life, but your animals beat him unconscious for witnessing your conspiracy." Blake zip-tied Derek's uninjured hand to the chair beside Vincent's, creating a grotesque tableau of the 2 conspirators bound together in the warehouse that Derek had thought was his sanctuary. "Let me explain what's going to happen," Blake continued, activating a video camera mounted on a tripod. "First, you're both going to confess to every murder you've committed. Names, dates, methods, everything. I already have enough evidence to destroy your entire network, but I want complete documentation." "You can't do this," Derek gasped through his pain. "I'm a lawyer. I have rights." Blake laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Rights? Like the rights of the women you murdered? Like my brother's right not to be beaten half to death?" Blake showed Derek the extensive files he'd compiled: financial records, victim profiles, recorded phone conversations between Derek and Candace, and Vincent's detailed confession from the mountains. "Your entire operation is already documented," Blake explained. "Every victim, every conspirator, every offshore account. But I want to hear it from you personally before I decide what happens next." Derek's lawyer instincts kicked in despite his pain. "What do you want? Money? I can transfer millions to your accounts. We can make a deal." "A deal?" Blake's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You plan to murder me and steal my wife. You've killed at least 12 innocent women. You had my brother beaten nearly to death. What kind of deal did you think we could make?" Blake pulled up a chair and sat facing his prisoners, the assault rifle resting casually across his knees. "Here's the only deal available. You confess to everything on camera, and I'll make sure your deaths are quick and clean. Try to lie or negotiate, and I'll take my time. Vincent broke first, pouring out details of every job he'd done for Derek. The man was a coward who'd been bullied into working for Derek through financial desperation and threats. Blake felt no sympathy for him, but Vincent's cooperation was useful for building the complete case file. Derek held out longer, trying to maintain some dignity, even as his severed fingers continued bleeding onto the warehouse floor. But when Blake began describing in clinical detail exactly how he'd killed enemy combatants during his military service, Derek's nerve broke completely. All right. I'll tell you everything. Just make it quick when you're done. What followed was 3 hours of the most comprehensive confession in criminal history. Derek detailed not just his own murders, but an entire network of killers for hire operating across the western United States. He named names, revealed bank accounts, and provided evidence that would send dozens of people to prison for life. By 4 p.m., Blake had everything he needed: 2 complete confessions, financial records, and enough evidence to dismantle Derek's entire organization. There's just one more thing, Blake said, standing and shouldering his rifle. I want you to call Candace. Derek stared at him in confusion. Call her? Why? Because she's still expecting you to return home and celebrate our successful murder. I think she deserves to know how this story really ends. Blake forced Derek to dial Candace's number on speakerphone. When she answered, her voice was bright with anticipation. Derek, how did everything go? Are we safe? Derek looked at Blake's cold expression, and the rifle pointed at his head. Candace, he said hoarsely. There's been a problem. Blake! Blake isn't dead. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Candace whispered, What do you mean he's not dead? I mean, Blake said, taking the phone, that your husband is very much alive, and he's been looking forward to coming home to have a conversation with his loving wife. Blake ended the call and smiled at Derek's terrified expression. Don't worry about Candace. I have special plans for her. Blake Morrison drove through the quiet streets of the Westbrook subdivision at 8 p.m. Saturday evening. His truck's headlights cut through the October darkness. To any observer, he looked like a man returning from a successful hunting trip, slightly tired, satisfied, ready to reunite with his wife after 3 days in the mountains. But in the truck bed, beneath a tarp and hunting gear, lay evidence bags containing Derek Walsh's personal effects, Vincent Torres's confession recordings, and detailed documentation of a murder-for-hire network that had operated across multiple states. Derek and Vincent themselves would never be found. The abandoned mine shaft in the Colorado mountains, where Blake had disposed of their bodies, was over 400 feet deep and had been sealed for decades. The lights were on in Blake's house, and Candace's BMW sat in the driveway exactly where she'd left it. But Blake knew she hadn't been alone since his phone call from the warehouse. His hidden surveillance cameras had recorded her frantic phone calls to Derek's emergency contacts, her attempts to flee the house, only to return when she realized she had nowhere to run, and her growing panic as the reality of her situation became clear. Blake parked in his garage and entered through the kitchen, moving with the casual ease of a man coming home from vacation. He found Candace in the living room, sitting rigidly on their leather sofa, with her hands folded in her lap. She was dressed carefully, conservative blouse, minimal makeup, the picture of a worried wife waiting for news about her missing husband. Blake, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Thank God you're safe. I was so worried when you didn't call. Blake set his duffel bag down and studied his wife's performance. Even now, knowing she'd planned his murder, she was still trying to maintain the charade. The audacity was almost impressive. My phone died on the mountain, Blake said conversationally. Sorry I worried you. Did anything interesting happen while I was gone? Candace's composure wavered slightly. Nothing special. I went to the book club Friday night, then the charity brunch this morning. Just kept busy. Blake nodded and moved to the bar cart, pouring himself a whiskey. That's funny. I tried calling Derek to ask him to check on you, but his phone went straight to voicemail. You haven't heard from him, have you? The color drained from Candace's face. Derek? No. Why would I hear from Derek? Blake took a slow sip of his whiskey, watching Candace's micro-expressions with the analytical eye of a trained interrogator. Fear, desperation, and calculation flickered across her features as she tried to process the implications of Derek's silence. Candace, Blake said quietly, I need you to know that I love you. Loved you. Despite everything you've done, part of me still remembers the woman I married. Candace's carefully constructed mask began to crack. Blake, I don't understand what you're talking about. 3 years of marriage, Blake continued, settling into the armchair across from her. 3 years of sharing a bed, planning a future, talking about children. Was any of it real? Or were you planning this from the beginning? Planning what? Blake, you're scaring me. Blake pulled out his phone and played the recording Tyler had made in this very room 3 nights ago. Candace's voice filled the living room. I don't know if I can watch him die. Derek, what if something goes wrong? Candace's face went completely white as Derek's recorded response followed. It'll look clean. My contacts know what they're doing. By Sunday night, you'll be a grieving widow with a very comfortable future. Tyler heard everything, Blake said when the recording ended. Your plan to murder me, your timeline, your financial arrangements with Derek. He tried to record it as evidence, and Derek's animals beat him half to death for it. Candace stared at the phone in Blake's hand, her mouth opening and closing silently. The sophisticated, beautiful woman who charmed her way into Blake's life had been reduced to a cornered animal. Blake, please, she finally whispered. I can explain everything. Derek manipulated me. He said he loved me, that he wanted to take care of me. I never wanted you to get hurt. Blake played another recording, Candace's phone conversation with Derek from just 6 hours ago. Derek, how did everything go? Are we safe? That doesn't sound like a manipulated victim, Blake observed. That sounds like a conspirator celebrating a successful murder. Candace suddenly lunged for the front door, but Blake had anticipated the move. He caught her wrist easily, his grip unbreakable after years of military training. Sit down, Candace. We're going to finish this conversation. Blake guided her back to the sofa, noting how she flinched at his touch. For 3 years, she'd hidden her revulsion behind the mask of a loving wife. But now, her true feelings were impossible to conceal. How long have you been planning this? Blake asked. When Candace didn't respond, Blake showed her printed copies of her phone records dating back 8 months. Rebecca Santos is very good at her job. Your first contact with Derek was March 15th through a dating app called Discreet Connections. You initiated the conversation. Blake spread the evidence across their coffee table like a prosecutor laying out a case. Phone records, financial documents, Derek's confession video, and photographs from the warehouse. Derek told me everything before he died, Blake said matter-of-factly. Every detail of your plan, every conversation you had, every murder he'd committed before targeting me. Did you know you weren't his first married target? He'd killed 2 other wives using the exact same method. Candace's composure finally shattered completely. She began sobbing, but Blake felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity from someone who'd been caught. "I never meant for Tyler to get hurt," she gasped between sobs. "I told Derek we should just leave, run away together. But he said you'd never stop hunting us if we just disappeared." "He was right about that," Blake said coldly. "But you made one fatal error in judgment, Candace. You assumed I was just another suburban husband who would be easy to eliminate." Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping to the deadly quiet tone that had terrified enemies from Iraq to Afghanistan. "Did Derek tell you about my military service? Did he research what they called me in Iraq?" Candace shook her head frantically. "The Phantom," Blake continued, "because my enemies never saw me coming until it was too late. Derek thought he was hunting a civilian, but he was actually hunting a man who'd killed more people than he could count in the service of his country." Blake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful suburban street where he'd thought he could build a normal life. "I'm going to give you a choice, Candace. The same choice I gave Derek and Vincent." He turned back to face his wife, his expression completely emotionless. "You can confess everything to the FBI tomorrow morning. Derek's entire network, your role in planning my murder, every detail of your conspiracy. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, but you'll be alive." "What's the alternative?" Candace whispered. Blake smiled, but there was nothing human in the expression. "You can try to run, try to disappear, and start a new life somewhere Derek's network can't find you. But you should know that I'll be hunting you, Candace. And when I find you, and I will find you, what happens next won't be as quick as what happened to Derek." Candace stared at him in absolute terror, finally understanding that the gentle husband she'd planned to murder had never really existed. The man standing before her was a predator who'd spent 12 years perfecting the art of killing, and she'd made the mistake of becoming his target. "Choose now," Blake said quietly. "Prison or running. Either way, this marriage is over." FBI agent Sarah Chun had seen a lot of confessions in her 15-year career, but nothing quite like the woman sitting across from her in the federal building's interrogation room. Candace Morrison had arrived that Sunday morning with a team of lawyers, a stack of evidence that could fill a warehouse, and a story that would take down one of the largest murder-for-hire networks in U.S. history. "Let me understand this correctly, Agent Chun," she said, reviewing her notes. "Your husband discovered your plan to have him murdered, tracked down your conspirators in Colorado, and convinced you to turn yourself in rather than face his personal justice." Candace nodded, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but her voice steady. The terror that Blake had inspired in her had been replaced by resigned determination. "Blake Morrison is not a man you want hunting you. I'd rather spend my life in federal prison than spend it looking over my shoulder." Agent Chun activated the recording equipment. "Tell me about Derek Walsh and his organization." What followed was 8 hours of the most comprehensive confession in FBI history. Candace detailed not just her own conspiracy to murder Blake, but Derek's entire network of killers for hire. Names, bank accounts, victim profiles, and operational methods that spanned across 12 states and involved over 30 active participants. Derek kept detailed records, Candace explained. He was obsessed with documenting his successes. He showed me files on dozens of victims, wealthy women, inheritance disputes, insurance fraud cases. He treated murder like a business. Agent Chun cross-referenced Candace's information with ongoing investigations and unsolved cases. The connections were staggering. Dozens of accidental deaths that suddenly made sense when viewed as coordinated murders. "What happened to Derek Walsh and Vincent Torres?" Agent Chun asked. Candace met her gaze directly. Blake said they wouldn't be a problem anymore. I believe him. Monday morning brought coordinated FBI raids across 7 states. Derek's network had grown complacent after years of success, and most of the conspirators were arrested without resistance. Bank accounts were frozen, evidence was seized, and a murder operation that had claimed over 40 lives was dismantled in a single day. Blake Morrison sat in his study, watching news coverage of the raids on multiple screens. His secure phone buzzed with congratulations from former teammates who recognized his handiwork, even though his name never appeared in any official reports. Tank Rodriguez called from Denver. Clean sweep on all targets. Your intelligence package was flawless. Any complications? None, Blake replied. Sponsor. Half these guys confessed before we finished reading them their rights. Your wife's testimony was the key that unlocked everything. Blake's house felt different now. Emptier, cleaner, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Candace's belongings were gone, donated to charity or destroyed. He'd had the carpets replaced, the walls repainted, every surface that might hold memories of their poisonous marriage scrubbed clean. Tyler arrived Tuesday afternoon, his jaw still wired, but his spirits improved. The news coverage had vindicated his sacrifice, and knowing that Derek's network could never hurt anyone else had given his suffering meaning. You did it, Tyler said, settling carefully into Blake's leather chair. They're all going down. Candace will probably get 25 to life, and the others will never see daylight again, Blake replied. Tyler studied his older brother's face, noting the absence of satisfaction or relief. How do you feel about it? Blake considered the question seriously. Empty. I thought I'd feel something when it was over. Justice, closure, something. But I just feel empty. That's normal after combat operations, Tyler observed. You've been running on adrenaline and anger for a week. Now that the mission's complete, you're processing what you've lost. Blake nodded. Tyler had always been the emotionally intelligent brother, able to see things that Blake's military training had taught him to suppress. I killed the woman I loved, Blake said quietly. Not physically, but I killed who I thought she was. The Candace I married never existed. I was in love with a lie. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Amanda Cross flew in from Phoenix, the woman Derek had planned to target after completing Blake's murder. She was in her 40s, recently widowed, with the kind of vulnerable wealth that Derek specialized in exploiting. I wanted to thank you personally, she said, sitting in Blake's living room, where Candace had received her ultimatum. Derek had been courting me for months. I was actually considering relocating to be closer to him. Blake studied Amanda's face, seeing the intelligence and strength that Derek had probably missed. You would have figured him out eventually. Maybe, but by then it might have been too late. Amanda handed Blake a business card. I run a foundation that helps victims of domestic violence and fraud. We'd like to fund a program to identify and stop predators like Derek before they can hurt anyone else. Blake accepted the card, feeling something stir in the emptiness that had consumed him since Candace's arrest. What kind of program? Intelligence gathering, background investigation, early warning systems for wealthy women who might be targeted. We need someone with your skills to design the operation. For the first time in a week, Blake felt a spark of genuine interest. Send me a proposal. I'll review it. Thursday evening, Blake received a final piece of closure. Rebecca Santos called with information about Derek's offshore accounts and hidden assets. Total recovery looks like $37 million, blood money from 4 decades of murder and fraud. The victims' families will be compensated, but there's a substantial remainder. What happens to the excess? Blake asked. That's up to the courts, but given your role in exposing the network, you'd have a legitimate claim to a significant portion. Blake considered the irony. Derek's plan to steal his wealth through murder had instead resulted in Blake inheriting Derek's fortune through justice. Set up a trust, Blake decided. Use it to fund Amanda Cross's foundation and victim compensation. I don't want any of Derek's money for myself. Friday marked 1 week since Tyler's beating. 1 week since Blake's world had collapsed and been rebuilt. He sat in his study, reviewing the case files one final time before turning them over to federal prosecutors. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek's network would be completely dismantled. Dozens of cold cases would be solved, and future victims would be protected. Justice had been served comprehensively. But Blake felt no satisfaction in victory. He'd spent 12 years serving his country, fighting enemies who threatened American lives and values. Now he'd fought a more personal war against enemies who'd threatened his family and his life. The missions were complete, but Blake Morrison was still figuring out who he was when he wasn't at war. 6 months after the FBI raids, Blake Morrison stood in the conference room of the Cross Foundation's new headquarters in Denver, reviewing intelligence reports that would have made his former CIA contacts proud. The organization Amanda Cross had envisioned had evolved into something far more sophisticated. A private intelligence network that identified and neutralized predators before they could claim victims. Target profile confirms pattern behavior, Rebecca Santos reported from the wall of monitors displaying their current operation. Richard Kellerman, 45, recently moved to Scottsdale after his second wife's accidental drowning in Lake Tahoe, currently targeting 3 wealthy widows simultaneously. Blake studied the surveillance photos and financial records spread across the table. Kellerman was Derek Walsh 2.0, charming, sophisticated, and methodical in his approach to murder for profit. But unlike Derek, Kellerman had made the mistake of operating in Blake's new area of expertise. Local law enforcement? Blake asked. Unaware and understaffed, Tank Rodriguez replied from his position at the tactical displays. Scottsdale PD has the money, but not the experience to handle something this sophisticated. They'd need 6 months to build a case that we've completed in 3 weeks. Amanda Cross entered the conference room, carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd found her life's purpose. 6 months of working with Blake had taught Amanda to think like a predator hunter, and she'd proven surprisingly adept at understanding the criminal mind. Kellerman scheduled to take his primary target, Patricia Kellwood, on a weekend sailing trip to Catalina Island, Amanda reported. It's the same method of operation he used with his second wife. Blake nodded, his mind already shifting into operational mode. Timeline? This weekend. He's rented a yacht, planned the route, even arranged for an alibi witness who will testify that Patricia was depressed and possibly suicidal. Blake had spent 6 months building this organization from Derek's blood money and his own military connections. The Cross Foundation officially provided security consulting and victim advocacy services, but their real work involved hunting predators with the same precision Blake had once used against enemy combatants. Tank, what's our tactical package? Blake asked. Tank Rodriguez smiled with the expression of a man who enjoyed his work. Full surveillance team already in position in Scottsdale. Electronic intercept on all of Kellerman's communications. We've got Coast Guard contacts who can respond to a maritime emergency within 30 minutes of our call. Blake's secure phone buzzed with a text from Tyler, who was back teaching, but served as the Foundation's psychological consultant. He had reviewed Kellerman's profile. Classic narcissistic psychopath with a messiah complex. won't be able to resist demonstrating his superiority when confronted. The past 6 months had been therapeutic for both brothers. Tyler's physical injuries had healed completely, but the emotional trauma of discovering humanity's capacity for evil had required professional help. Working with the Foundation had given him a sense of purpose in fighting the darkness he'd witnessed. For Blake, the Foundation had provided something he'd never expected to find after leaving the military, a mission that mattered. He was still a hunter, still a predator, but now he was hunting monsters instead of foreign enemies. "Rebecca, what's our evidence package?" Blake asked. Rebecca Santos pulled up financial records and communication intercepts that painted a comprehensive picture of Kellerman's criminal operation. "Solid enough for federal prosecution, but you know how these cases go. Rich defendants, expensive lawyers, reasonable doubt arguments. He'd probably plead down to involuntary manslaughter." Blake had learned in 6 months of private justice that the legal system was designed for ordinary criminals, not sophisticated predators like Derek and Kellerman. Men who killed for profit required solutions that courtrooms couldn't provide. "Amanda, what's Patricia Kelwood's psychological profile?" Amanda consulted her tablet, pulling up weeks of discrete observation and background investigation. Highly intelligent, recently widowed after 40 years of marriage, worth approximately $15 million from her husband's technology patents. She's lonely, vulnerable, but not naive. She's starting to have doubts about Kellerman. Doubts, small things, inconsistencies in his stories, his knowledge of sailing despite claiming to be an expert, his insistence on taking out extra life insurance policies. Her husband was a detail-oriented man who taught her to notice when things don't add up. Blake felt the familiar calm that preceded complex operations. Kellerman thought he was hunting an easy target, but he was actually walking into a trap designed by someone who understood predators from the inside. "Here's the operational plan," Blake announced. "Tank's team maintains discreet surveillance throughout the weekend. Rebecca monitors all electronic communications. Amanda, you're going to accidentally encounter Patricia at the marina and become her new best friend." "What about Kellerman?" Tank asked. Blake smiled with the cold expression his former teammates would recognize. "I'm going to join their sailing trip as an uninvited guest." Saturday morning brought perfect sailing weather to Catalina Island. Clear skies, calm seas, and enough isolation for Kellerman to stage another perfect accident. Blake watched through high-powered binoculars as Kellerman's yacht departed Marina del Rey with Patricia aboard. Both of them played their roles in what Kellerman believed would be his greatest performance. Blake followed in his own boat, a 30-foot military surplus vessel that Tank had modified with surveillance equipment and tactical capabilities that would make the Coast Guard jealous. 20 miles from shore, Blake activated his approach plan. Kellerman's yacht. "This is the vessel Phantom requesting assistance," Blake broadcast on the emergency frequency. "I'm experiencing engine failure and need help." Through his scope, Blake watched Kellerman's reaction. The man's face showed irritation rather than concern. He didn't want witnesses to his planned murder. But Patricia was insisting they helped the distressed vessel, and Kellerman couldn't refuse without revealing his true nature. Blake maneuvered his boat alongside Kellerman's yacht and climbed aboard with the easy confidence of a man comfortable on the water. He was dressed as a recreational sailor, casual clothes, friendly demeanor, no obvious weapons. "Richard Kellerman," Blake said, extending his hand. "I appreciate the help." Kellerman's grip was firm, but his eyes were calculating, already working through the complications Blake's presence created. "No problem. What seems to be the issue with your engine?" "Oh, there's no engine problem," Blake replied conversationally. I just wanted to meet the man who's planning to murder Patricia this afternoon." The change in atmosphere was instantaneous. Patricia gasped and stepped backward, her hand moving to the emergency radio. Kellerman's face went through a series of rapid transformations: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally the cold mask of a predator who'd been exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kellerman said carefully. "I think you should leave." Blake pulled out his phone and played a recording of Kellerman's conversation with his alibi witness. "Make sure you mention that Patricia seemed depressed lately, talking about joining her husband. The Coast Guard will find her body in 3 days, and everyone will understand it was suicide." Patricia's face went white as the implications hit her. "Richard, what is this? What's he talking about?" Blake handed Patricia a folder containing photographs, financial records, and detailed profiles of Kellerman's previous victims. "Your boyfriend has killed at least 4 women in the past decade, all of them wealthy widows like yourself. Today's sailing trip was meant to be your last." Kellerman lunged for the boat's emergency locker, where he'd hidden a spear gun, but Blake had anticipated the move. A single strike to Kellerman's solar plexus dropped him to the deck, gasping for air. "Patricia," Blake said calmly, "please use the radio to contact the Coast Guard. Tell them you have a medical emergency and need immediate assistance." As Patricia made the radio call, Blake zip-tied Kellerman's hands and began the same interrogation process he'd used with Derek Walsh. The results were even more damning. Kellerman had killed 7 women over 15 years, accumulating over $20 million in stolen assets. "You can't do this," Kellerman gasped. "This is kidnapping, assault, false imprisonment." Blake smiled with the expression that had terrified enemies in Iraq. "Actually, this is justice. The legal system failed your previous victims, but it won't fail Patricia." The Coast Guard arrived 30 minutes later to find Kellerman confessing to multiple murders, while Patricia provided testimony that would ensure his conviction. Blake's evidence package, delivered through anonymous channels, gave federal prosecutors an airtight case that would result in life sentences without the possibility of parole. Monday morning, Blake returned to Denver and the Cross Foundation headquarters, where Amanda was already reviewing their next case file. "Kellerman's been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder," she reported. "Patricia's testimony was the key that unlocked everything. She's also agreed to fund our next operation." Blake reviewed the new case file. Another predator, another pattern of wealthy women dying in convenient accidents. The war against predators would never end. But Blake had found his place in it. Tyler arrived for their weekly consultation, his face showing the satisfaction of a man who'd found peace with his trauma. "How does it feel to save lives instead of taking them?" Blake considered the question seriously. For 6 months, he'd been using his lethal skills to protect the innocent instead of eliminating enemy combatants. The work was different, but the satisfaction was deeper. "Like I finally found what I was meant to do," Blake replied. Outside the conference room windows, Denver stretched toward the Rocky Mountains, where Derek Walsh had died 6 months ago. Blake Morrison had been many things in his life: soldier, husband, betrayed man seeking justice. Now he was something new, a guardian who stood between predators and their prey. The Phantom had found his final mission, and Blake Morrison had finally come home from the war. He looked out across the city, knowing the fight would never truly end. But this time, he was fighting for something good, and that made all the difference.